So welcome to Meditation 101. My name is Dondrub, and I will be leading the sessions this month for this course. So this course is one of the really three introductory level courses that we offer, courses that are designed for complete beginners, people who don't have any experience in meditation or in Tibetan Buddhism. Those three courses are this one, Meditation 101, as well as Buddhism in a Nutshell, and then a course also called Introduction to Mindfulness. Typically, those three courses, they're all monthly courses and they're offered on Tuesday nights at this time. So we sort of cycle through the three of them. Next month, we do actually have a visiting teacher, Charak Lama, and he's teaching a great deal in February. So the introductory classes are taking a break so that we can have teachings with him. But those are all posted. There's many, many teachings with a very special Lama who will be here. So almost all of those are available on Zoom as well. So in person and on Zoom. So this class, Meditation 101, as I say, it is for complete beginners. And what I would say its purpose is to help a person through the course as a whole to understand how to put together a meditation practice on their own, how to structure, how to have a meditation practice at home, a daily practice. There will be throughout the sessions, there will be an opportunity or opportunities for the practice of meditation together, but it's not really a class that is about the group practice of meditation. We will introduce some individual meditations, we will engage in some individual meditations, but the purpose of the course is really to give a person the information that they need to be able to structure their practice at home. Um, we do have Monday through Friday at 7:30 to 8 a.m. Mountain Time. We do have a 30-minute meditation class that is just a guided meditation, a 30-minute guided meditation. And then there is one also at 9 o'clock, but the 9 o'clock one is on purification practice, which is a little bit more advanced in a way, whereas the morning class, the 7:30 class, is a variety of different kinds of meditation. So we do have opportunities for simply guided practice on the schedule. But as I say, this class is the ultimate goal is to help a person to be able to create their own practice at home. Are there any thoughts or questions so far? All right. So ours, yes.
I was just wondering, are there any meditations at the Buddhist Center? Like, for instance, I've been to Mountain Cloud Zen Center a couple times, and I was just wondering, yeah, if there's in-person meditations.
Not really. Not at this time. We have very few. Most of our teachers are actually out of Santa Fe. And the 7:30 class, it's so early that people just as a practical matter, people won't come. We tried it and it just didn't work. So in terms of like, doing zooming that out from the center or showing it we have screens in the Gompa, we could, put it on the screens in the Gompa. Um, and it's too early, unfortunately, for people as a practical issue. So I mean, within the courses that we offer, particularly like the Sunday morning class that we have going on right now with Elaine, she's incorporating a number of different meditations into the course. But it is also, there's a lecture component as well. We do not have anything that's like a sitting circle. at the center. Any other questions so far? Okay, so our center, if Tupten Norbuling is an FPMT center. FPMT stands for the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition, FPMT. As an FPMT center, we are coming from the Tibetan Buddhist perspective. Um, the Zen Center was just mentioned, and which is a different Mahayana tradition. There's broadly speaking Mahayana and Theravada. Um, the Tibetan system is what our center is based on. So that is the perspective that we will be presenting. And it's relevant in a way for the Meditation 101 class because we will be talking to, in a fair amount of detail about the idea of what's called analytical meditation. And that is particularly emphasized within the Tibetan system. It's not something that is as emphasized in other Buddhist systems. Buddhism, like Christianity, like Judaism, like Islam, has different flavors, is packaged in different ways. And so we do present the material from a Tibetan Buddhist perspective. And if you wanted to go more granularly, within the Gelug system of Tibetan Buddhism, there are four. Even within Tibetan Buddhism, humans are very good at coming up with different packaging. And so there's four different schools, main schools in Tibetan Buddhism, and it's the Gelug tradition specifically that we are based in. As an FPMT center, though, it is also true that the purpose of FPMT isn't to recreate the kind of experience that you would find in Tibetan monasteries. The goal is to make the teachings relevant and accessible for the Western mind. That was really the goal. FPMT was started by Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche in the late 60s, early 70s through the mid 70s into the early 80s was sort of the burgeoning of FPMT. And it was their mission really to make it relevant and accessible for the Western mind. So we try to do that. We try to present the essence of what is presented in Tibetan Buddhism, but we're not attempting to create a cultural experience that you might find within a Tibetan community. So that is the intent of how things are presented from FPMT. Okay, so meditation is the word that we translate into English. When we say meditation, we're translating a Tibetan word, which is the word gom, Gom. The place of meditation, like, for example, in our center, people will go into the Gompa, the place of meditation, the place of, and so that word, Gom, the Tibetan word that we translate as meditation, a more literal translation into English is to become familiar, to familiarize the mind. So we do that also by listening to teachings and listening to lectures. So the place where all of that familiarization is happening is the Gompa, the place of familiarization. So, what we're particularly interested in with respect to meditation, with this kind of familiarization, is familiarizing the mind with what's called a virtuous object. We are already spending time every day practicing getting frustrated, practicing, you know, having maybe ill thoughts of ill will toward people who upset us or wrong us, practicing impatience, these habits, these tendencies that come easily, that are not so helpful, that they are not really aiding us in our goal to progress in a spiritual direction. meditation or familiarization from the Buddhist perspective is centered around objects of meditation that are virtuous in their nature. So it is a process, it is sort of an inner technology, an inner process wherein over time we become more and more familiar with these virtuous objects, these constructive ways of thinking, of acting, of perceiving, of cognizing. The intent of that is to transform the mind, is over time, after 5, 10, 20, 50 years of familiarizing the mind, that the mind is fundamentally different over time. That we start out, as I said, we are already someone who is practicing some tendencies, some habits that are not really serving us in a beneficial spiritual way. But after years and years of putting time, putting energy, putting effort into this kind of familiarization, then the mind becomes different. The mind becomes the kind of mind where, as right now, maybe we could say non-virtue arises fairly easily. We find it easy to respond to harm with an unkind word, um, with an unkind deed. We can become someone who doesn't do that. We can become someone who responds to harm with kindness, who responds. And that is the goal of Buddhist practice. And that goal is served primarily through having a meditation practice, by ideally getting to a point where every day we are engaging in sessions of meditation, intentionally familiarizing our mind with virtue. Because from the Buddhist perspective, the only difference between these great masters, spiritual masters, and oneself, even the only difference between oneself and a Buddha, fully enlightened being, is that time, that energy, that effort that they put into familiarizing their mind with virtue, and that we just haven't fully accomplished yet. But our mind is suitable to accomplish that. Our mind is the same kind of mind that the Buddha had. And so that unlocks, with time, with energy, with effort, our own mind transforms, not only in just being kinder, more compassionate, but actually can transform into the mind of a fully awakened being, a fully enlightened being. And of course, if that's not a person's goal, if a person has the goal of, again, wanting to have more kindness, more compassion, more generosity, more patience, more spaciousness in the mind, then meditation also will serve that goal. And meditation can be also altered, or can be used in different philosophical contexts, can be used to support other religious systems. A person can meditate using other texts, other bodies of knowledge, and become familiar with it in that way. So as a system, as a technique, as a process, meditation can be applied in different ways for different types of practitioners or spiritual seekers. Um, but we are going to incorporate some elements of Buddhism, again, from the Tibetan Buddhist perspective, as we go through the course as well. Is that clear? Are there any thoughts or questions? So meditation, then, it does, from the Buddhist perspective, it has a central role in how a person unlocks the potential of their mind. And it's, from the Buddhist perspective, as I say, the Buddhist perspective is quite unique in the sense that it presents the potential of everyone's mind as really being unlimited, as being the kind of mind that can not only develop more love, more compassion, more generosity, but can perfect the practice of love, can perfect the practice of generosity and patience and ethics and so on, can develop the mind to the point where there are no mistakes, where there are no faults, where there are no flaws in one's practice of these virtuous states. And that is the flourishing of our potential into a fully awakened being, a fully enlightened being, a being who is beyond those kinds of errors that we are subject to, that so often cloud our own mind, our own ordinary mind. And that's a philosophical point of view that's not really shared by any other philosophical system, that we don't simply go somewhere that's pleasant after death and kind of remain there, but that the mind itself, that the jealousy, the anger, the ill will, the self-centeredness, all of the painful, constricting states of mind that we know that we experience on a day-to-day basis, those are completely removable from the mind. Those are not in the nature of the mind. And so they're separable from the mind. And it's really this process of familiarization with the antidotes to those negativities that is what a Buddhist practitioner does, is the purpose of their meditation. So it's not ultimately, again, from the Buddhist perspective, it doesn't have um, kind of a short-term purpose. It's not a relaxation exercise. It does profoundly relax the body and mind. It does support physical and mental well-being on a day-to-day basis. But ultimately, from the Tibetan Buddhist perspective, the goal really is to unlock this exceptional potential that is the nature of our own mind, by really, with this understanding that all of the limitations that we are experiencing, and again, if you were to go to a therapist and say, I'd like to be completely free of all ill will, be completely free of all self-centeredness, live my life completely for the benefit of others. They would be like, well, I'm sorry, you're in the wrong place. I can't, that's not really possible. That I can help you, not lash out at people as much. I can help you, avoid really creating a lot of interpersonal conflict or harm. But there really isn't this, in the Western perspective, there really isn't this idea that we can be fully free from any trace of the self-centered mind, any trace of, um, again, jealousy, covetousness, maliciousness, ill will, greediness, um, all of the things that are the root cause of conflict in our relationships, conflict in the world, um, conflict between groups, between nations, wars. All of this is traceable to the mind of the sentient beings that are, involved in these actions, and the limitations that are currently part of those minds. But again, those limitations, yes, they do arise. They arise in our daily experience. They arise, um, you know, in every moment of our waking experience, but they don't have to. It's not something that we ultimately are necessarily stuck with. It's not baked into the very fabric of the mind itself. So if we put in the work, if we engage in that effort, then at the end of that process, this flourishing of our potential really is, from the Buddhist perspective, really is within reach. It really is, not out of the question, that we can attain a state where there are no negativities arising in the mind. There is no selfishness. There is no conflict. There is no greed, no envy, no jealousy, no maliciousness. Um, so that's why I think you'd have to say that's why the Buddha gave the patient. That's why the Buddha presented this inner technology. It's really the vehicle that a practitioner would use to unlock that potential, to get to that end goal. But of course, if a person is looking for something, more so um, tied to improving their relationships, and trying to be wiser, trying to be more kind, trying to be more compassionate. Those are wonderful goals as well, and meditation is absolutely the same, in a way, the same vehicle, because um, there's there isn't a gene for compassion. There isn't a gene for, love. It's a familiarity in the mind. It's a tendency. It's a habit. And so we can train in it. We can develop that. How long, how extensively we think we can develop it, that can be dependent on different philosophical systems, but it's all from the Buddhist perspective, this is all simply what the mind is most familiar with. If we practice anger, day after day, year after year, decade after decade, we are going to become very good at getting angry at people. We are going to find that that arises quickly, easily, with no obstacle. If we practice patience day after day, year after year, we will get to a point where patience arises easily with no obstacle, because of the strength of that familiarity, the force of that habit. And meditation is how we create those habits. So when we talk about meditation, it is also true that really we are talking about what's called formal meditation, or sitting meditation, sitting practice. And that does have a posture that is recommended, that we'll go into a little bit. So to kind of get a sense of, because if we're going to establish a daily practice, um, then there is an importance to setting the body up correctly, ideally really from the beginning. You want to think about, what is the best way, what do I do with my body? I got to do something while I'm meditating. So if I can, from the very beginning, practice really good habits with what I'm doing with my physical body, then the benefit of that is that over time, as we meditate more, the mind is going to withdraw more and more. It's going to go more inward. Um, when we are awake, when we're engaging with others, our eyes are open, we are talking, we're moving through the world. The mind at that time is described as coarse. Um, from the Buddhist perspective, meaning that it's primarily observing things outside of itself and engaging with them. That's a coarse level of mind. It's coarse in opposition to subtle. A subtle mind is a mind that is withdrawn from interacting, from that which is outside, with the external world. So the quieter, the more internal, the more withdrawn the mind is, the subtler it becomes. And when a person meditates, for years and years and years, their mind in those sessions of meditation is getting better and better at being withdrawn, at being subdued, at not engaging with the external world. And there comes a relaxation response in the body in connection with that subtlety of the mind. And at these higher levels of subtlety, the relaxation response in the body is such that if a person doesn't have a good posture, then they're kind of going to flop over. They're going to sort of, literally fall over. And also, so you want to be prepared for that relaxation response that can happen in the body. And if you set yourself up for success from the very beginning, then you eliminate any obstacles. Also, we know that that how we hold the body can have a relationship to whether drowsiness arises, and we tend towards sleepiness, which is an obstacle to meditation. Um, we might have aches and pains in the body that holding the body in a more stable way might eliminate. And so those aches and those pains, if we can eliminate them from arising, then also we eliminate obstacles. So there's a lot of benefits to adopting a really stable posture and putting thought and um, intention behind how we hold the body when we're engaging in the meditation. So, ideally, the posture is going to depend upon or going to use a cushion on the floor. That's ideal. Um, if you need to use a chair, that's totally fine. That's completely acceptable. A cushion on the floor is ideal, as I say, and sometimes, and so there's a lot of personal preference involved in how that's going to go. There's a number of different types of cushions, and people really, you kind of just have to experiment. You kind of have to see what works for you. Some people prefer, ones that are higher. Some people prefer thinner cushions. It's common to have two cushions, one that's a bit larger and one that's smaller. You sit on the smaller one, and the larger one is really meant to protect like your feet and your ankles from rubbing against the floor. Uh, so whether you have one, whether you have two, whether it's higher or shorter, really, really just personal preference. And what there's different materials. They've got memory foam now. There's all kinds of different options that are out there. Some are rectangular, some are circular. So really you just have to play around and see what works for you. And again, if you feel like a chair is what you're going to be doing, then great. You just stick with that and no worries. um, but if we just assume that we're going to be using a cushion on the floor, then the first thing to be aware of is how we're going to position the legs in this sitting position. So there's really three options for this. The ideal is what's called the full Vajra position. This requires the highest degree of flexibility, and this is also the most stable of all of the positions. And what this means is that each foot is resting on the opposing thigh. So all the way up on the thigh, both feet on the opposing thigh. Very difficult for most people to get into full Vajra position. As I say, it requires very high degree of flexibility. But it's ideal if you can manage it, or if you think if it's a goal that you want to hold for 5 years from now, I'd like to progress to full Vajra position. That's a wonderful goal to try to hold and to try to make progress. there's not a lot of teaching on that process of making progress toward, from where you are in Tibetan Buddhism. Um, Yoga is a Hindu system, of movement. I think a lot of people do find that helpful. There's Tai Chi, there's Qigong, there's yoga. There are these other movement systems, but none of them are Tibetan specifically. So there's not really like a, a formal movement um, teaching in Tibetan Buddhism. Really, what they would say is that you would start your session trying to approximate the full Vajra position, even if you can only hold it for a couple of seconds, or even if it's pretty far from the full Vajra position, you would kind of pull the foot up till it starts to be a little bit uncomfortable. Don't go into pain or anything, but you start to feel some tension, and then you hold that for a few seconds at least, and then you relax to something that's more comfortable. But you start every single session like that, doing that, and then you're sort of stretching things out over time. Um, but as I say, yoga is certainly quite helpful. Different stretches and so on can be very helpful to develop that flexibility. But there's no system really that's taught in Tibetan Buddhism other than that sort of progressive, it is sort of a stretch, but this progressive system that they encourage. Um, if you aren't able to do full Vajra, then there's what's called half lotus or half vajra, which is where one foot is tucked under one leg, and then the other foot is resting on the opposing thigh. So it's half of the full vajra position. Still requires a great deal of flexibility, still quite difficult for most people. So, what really most people just kind of call good enough is just cross legged, kind of just the normal cross legged position. Um, but again, if you think that you would really like to be able to adopt that more stable position, then you start with half lotus, or doing your best to get close to half lotus, and then you just begin that every single session for a couple of seconds. Just important to never do anything that feels painful. But and then after a couple of years, maybe you are able to really get to that full Vajra position. So those are the three choices that you have for what you're going to do with your legs. You don't want to have your legs out, in front of you. Um, in this tradition, some Buddhist traditions have like a kneeling bench. That's not, I mean, you certainly could do that. It's not practiced in Tibetan Buddhism, really. The idea of a kneeling bench isn't just not part of that culture. So these are the three positions that are talked about it within this cultural presentation. But certainly the Zen folks, they use kneeling benches and seems to work. But it's just culturally, it didn't really take root in Tibetan Buddhism. Um, I'll pause again. Any thoughts, questions? Yes.
I have a question. I don't know if you're going to address this later or if this is a good time to talk about it, but I used to be able to sit in the half lotus, but I can't any longer. And at most I could sit like cross-legged, but like not like this, but kind of like that. At most, maybe 15 minutes. So what I'm starting to do now is sit on a chair and put my meditation cushion on my feet. Is this a good time for you to talk about like how we sit um properly on the chair? Because there are a lot of times I find that I'm slouching. Like I'll recognize, oh, I've slouched. But I know when I sit on the cushion and I sit half lotus or even like legs crossed like this, my back is straight and I never have to worry about it.
Yeah, so actually, the back being straight is actually the most important, really kind of the most important aspect. So there's these different, we just started with the legs in terms of like, we're kind of working our way up the body in terms of the different parts. Um, but having a straight back really is, the most important. So if you are using a chair, totally fine, as I say, and you do want to have your feet be supported, then so that and that can certainly involve putting some sort of cushion or a bench or something so that your feet aren't dangling. You definitely don't want to have your feet be dangling, and then you do want them to be flat. So if you're in a chair, you want your feet to be flat. And however you can accomplish that, you probably don't want them like um, elevated to where it's like kind of pushed up. Like, you want probably your thighs to be relatively flat. So you don't want it to be like so high that it's sort of like compressing compressing the body. But flat feet, definitely. So however you can accomplish your feet being feeling supported, feeling flat, do that. Um, and if you feel like it's more helpful to put something on the chair, totally fine. The other aspect of, in terms of the back being straight, if you're on a cushion, then of course, naturally there's just air behind you, right? So if you're in a chair, that could be different. You might have a back to the chair, and you do want to not really rely on a back with a chair. You don't want to kind of be leaning into the back if there is a back to the chair. So that might involve just scooting forward, 1 or 2 inches, so that you're not just kind of, doing that. You want to sort of replicate what you would have if it was a cushion, which means like, yes, there's a back, but no, I'm not going to flop into the back, or I'm not going to let the back kind of do the work of supporting my upper body. um, and of course, what people find when they start to meditate, um, is that they discover all kinds of small stabilizing muscles that they didn't know that they had. And they can be a bit sore the next day, even after just 1 or 2 sessions in the very beginning, because there are a lot of small stabilizing muscles in the low back, that are helping to keep you upright, that are helping, because as you said, it is important not to be leaning forward, also not to be leaning back, not to be leaning to either side. Um, they mention a couple different visualizations that can be helpful. Venerable Katie is really keen on bringing those visualizations in, thinking about like a beam of light coming from the tailbone, shooting all the way up to the top of the back of the head. And you don't want that beam of light to break. You don't want it to like, you want it to stay straight. So you don't want it to be doing any of this. It's just a straight beam of light, or a string of pearls, they say, because the pearls would be kind of cockeyed if it wasn't able to hang in a perfectly straight line. So using those visualizations, at least maybe in the beginning or during the breathing meditation part of can kind of help you to have an awareness of, have I started to lean? Have I? Because it's normal, it's totally natural to, like, you get a little bit tired, you get a little bit fatigued, or maybe you're just already tired. It's been a long day, and you're starting out tired. Um, so those can be helpful. Yes, you want to.
Yeah, what I wanted to say was because now I have to sit on the chair, I've been advised to sit like more to the front of the chair. So like my seat bones are more to the front. So yes, I'm not leaning on anything. But what I noticed is and so there were times where I would just sit very much close to the edge of the chair and put my feet down. I just wanted to know, does it make a difference? Because I just like the cushion on my feet. It just feels a little more comfortable. Does that make a difference? And also, like, I will sit like this, but then I notice like I'll go like that. So that's not like my back will be like this when I'm sitting at the edge, but then eventually it goes like this. So that's not what we want. We want it to keep doing this. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, you don't want to start rounding, rounding in the back or, yeah, and so, we'll talk about, like the idea of, short sessions and, because again, this is sort of hygiene, posture hygiene, is kind of what so, if your sessions are short, and you go into it thinking about, starting about thinking about, what am I doing with my legs, my arms, my etc. Um, and just trying to maintain some awareness over the course of the session, kind of checking in and, you know, in the same way that when we notice distraction, like when we notice that we've started to think about, lunch or, whatever, we bring the mind back, right? So in the same way, when we've noticed that our posture is changed, we just correct it. We don't beat ourselves in the same way. When you start thinking about, you don't think, oh, I'm terrible at this is awful. No, you just notice that distraction has arisen in the mind and you bring the mind back. So when your posture has slipped, you just notice, oh, my posture is, different. And so I'm going to bring it back to, and then over time, you kind of get with the program. Your body kind of will just, it's just a habit. It's just, so keeping your session short certainly makes that easier. Trying to meditate for long periods from the very beginning, kind of setting yourself up, to fail if, like, oh, I'm going to do an hour a day every day. It's a bad idea. Great to do an hour, but to, do that in like 5 15 minute, session, 4 or 5 15 minute, 10 15 minute sessions throughout the day, and then you've still done an hour, but it's really productive, to do that instead of just saying, oh, I'm just going to power through. And, um, but yeah, it's just about having introspective awareness, having mindfulness about, and then as soon as you notice, you just make a change to what's happening. And then you make that change consistently enough, and it's just going to get easier and easier. In terms of, I mean, when you are on a cushion, um, I mean, the cushion, generally comes to probably mid thigh, in general. Um, so I, I mean, ultimately, I would say one of the most important things too is to be comfortable, is to, not to do anything that makes you feel self-conscious, that makes you feel uncomfortable, that it feels that is, because that is in and of itself a distraction. And so if you're intentionally making yourself distracted by doing something that doesn't feel right, that's not going to be, now, I mean, that, within reason, like I say, I mean, even the Buddha even taught, lying prone as an option, right? That is an option. It's not, we're talking here about the ideal, most stable, most contained posture. But I mean, there are sutras where the Buddha taught lying prone as an option for people. But he said, like, if you're sick, if you're, you know, or if you're trying to meditate like right before bed, you don't have to be like, oh, I can't meditate because I've laid down. That's not true. You absolutely can meditate right before you go to sleep, lying prone. Um, so what here we're just talking about, like, how do I set myself up in the most stable posture that's possible. But yeah, I mean, if someone says like, oh, this is ideal, and you try it and then you're like, this just isn't going to work, then you make adjustments for what is going to work.
Thank you.
Okay, so then as we move up the body, as I said, the next thing really is the trunk, the back, the trunk of the body. And um we fuzz. Nobody told me I had fuzz. You guys got to tell me, hey, you got some fuzz.
I didn't
Um,
even notice it.
I think maybe it was uncut. I moved and I.
Sorry, next time, if any.
So yeah, so the trunk, the chest, the back, keeping that straight is important. So we've covered that. You don't want to be leaning forward. You don't want to be leaning back. You don't want to be leaning to the sides. That's quite important. Your arms and your hands. Typically, what we do is we take the right hand and we put it over the left, like this, and then we just touch the thumbs and we put that up against the belly. So you want to have a natural soft belly. You don't want to be thinking about sucking it in or like, you just natural soft belly and then right up against the belly, like this is most common. Some people like to just, put their hands on their knees. That's okay too. If you feel more comfortable with that. Sometimes you see like this kind of a thing. That's not really taught. I mean, that it's not taught really in Tibetan Buddhism to like do that with your, it's not taught. If you've been doing that and that works for you, okay. Um, what you don't want to do is have your arms dangling at your sides. That's not a good, that's bad. So don't do that. Um, so you want to have either of these, your legs are supporting your arms. Either if it's like this or if it's like this, you have resistance, you have support, and that's what you need. You need to have that resistance, that support. With this, kind of one advantage of this is that you sort of create a complete energy circuit, in using your upper body, having the two arms connected, kind of energetically creates a circuit. So that does allow the energies to flow a little bit better. So that's why it's taught as the ideal. So we have a back, and so then your shoulders, you don't want to have them, you don't want to think about, oh, they've got to be like up. You don't want to push them back. You just want to kind of, rest them. Just natural, they've just sort of rested. Um, and you want a little bit of air, so again, you don't want to press your arms like firmly against your side and be like this. And you also don't want to like push them out, but you just want to kind of have some air circulating, so a little bit of space, um, in there. So not exaggerated in either direction, just kind of space. And then your head and your neck is also part of the posture. So you want to avoid like looking up at the ceiling, and you also want to avoid like looking straight down. You do want to have your chin tucked a little bit. So you want to have kind of like make a 45-degree, 45-degree angle that's kind of gently downward. So it's a gentle downward gaze. So it's not up, it's not down, but it's just ever so slightly tucked and kind of a bit forward, a bit, unfocused gaze kind of forward. Your eyes, are also kind of generally part of it. So, and again, it's quite personal. Some people really prefer having their eyes closed. Some, generally slightly open is a little bit better, a little bit more common. So having a slit, of light at the bottom is ideal. It helps to avoid, drowsiness. But if you do feel more comfortable with your eyes closed, then that's okay. You want to think about the relationship between how much light is in the room and what you're doing with your eyes. So, what I wouldn't do is go into a really dark room and fully close my eyes. You're going to tend toward drowsiness. You're going to tend toward sleepiness with that. So, if you do like to have your eyes totally closed, then you want to make sure there's probably a bit more ambient light in the room. If you've got like a slit of light because your eyes are not fully closed, then it can be a bit darker, in the room. And then you can play around if you are tending toward drowsiness, then turning on more lights, can be helpful, because as I say, meditation does have a physical relaxation response in the body, but it's not about the mind is sharp, the mind is concentrated, the mind is focused. And so we don't want to tend toward drought. It's unavoidable sometimes, but it isn't nap time. It isn't daydreaming time. It isn't, a time to just kind of check out and to be, like I say, there are benefits. We do feel more relaxed. We do feel it is pleasant, physically and mentally pleasant, but that's not its purpose. It's not a time to, if we want to do a relaxation, fantastic, like great, no one's saying don't relax, but meditation isn't for that. We do that separately. We do that at a different time where we're like, okay, I'm going to listen to music. I'm going to put on my eye mask. I'm going to, relax. I'm going to actually I'm going to listen to something and, you know, do that. That's wonderful. Like if that helps you, but meditation, the mind is really sharp. The mind is really focused. So if we find ourselves, or when we find ourselves tending toward drowsiness, that's an obstacle that we should try to correct. We should do something so that the mind is sharp again. And we'll talk about these obstacles and antidotes to these obstacles. Yeah, so that's really the aspects of the posture, is from the legs to the back, to the arms, to the hands, to the head, to the eyes, the shoulders. Yvonne, yes.
Okay, I'm trying. Okay, so with the hands, for me, I just need to cut. So is it the right hand is underneath?
It's right over left. So left is
okay.
on the bottom.
So the left is on the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the thumbs
just
are
like
touching.
against the belly, really soft. Okay, so
Yeah.
I had it wrong. So the left at the bottom. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions? Yvonne, did you have another question, or did you just still have the button pushed? Or
No, I just have the button pushed. I'll
okay.
turn it off now.
No
Sorry.
problem. No, it's fine.
I had a quick question.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Is it better to meditate in a group or by yourself?
Well, I would say, I mean, ideally, you want to meditate often. And I mean, ideally, you want to meditate every day. You want to, I mean, of course, we're almost certainly not going to start there, but I would say consistency is the most important part of a practice. So if you can go somewhere very often, if there is a place where you can go, then that's great. But if not, consistency is, in terms of the benefits of meditation, consistency is the most important. It's certainly, there is an energetic component to group meditation sometimes. Certainly people, and of course depending on maybe if there's a if there are advanced meditators in that group, or if there's a higher lama or someone, of course, because the mind is, and we'll talk more about the sort of theory or nature of the mind next time, but the mind is a non-physical energy, so it's not the brain. It doesn't, and it extends beyond the body. So certainly Buddhism acknowledges that when people are practicing together, that collectively, that there's an energetic effect of that. They're all in the same place at the same time, focusing their attention, focusing their mind. So I think many people have the experience that they might find it easier to slip into deeper states of meditation in certain group settings. Other people, of course, are going to find, the coughing and the sneezing and the moving of chairs and the rustling of clothes. So that can certainly be an obstacle too. In the beginning, for people, you do want to think about how conducive your environment is, particularly as someone who's new. You want to set yourself up to be successful in minimizing environmental distractions. And so certainly there are certainly times when everyone is experiencing, someone has a cold and they're just constantly sniffling, and you're like, you just can't do it, because you're being taken out of it. So definitely, but it's certainly true that there are benefits to group practice. But in terms of like one's own spiritual progress, the one thing that has the biggest impact is getting consistent with your practice. So how whatever way that, if going to a circle or sitting, if that's like, oh, I've set my goal and it's close by and I can do it, and that's going to motivate me, and that's going to help you get into that habit, then, that's amazing. Definitely. So now we'll talk about kind of two skills of meditation. Two main skills that they talk about that we cultivate in meditation. There's what's called mindfulness, or I used the term earlier, introspective awareness or mindfulness. And then there's concentration, or single pointedness. So these are the two skills that when we meditate, we cultivate, we develop. So concentration and mindfulness or introspective awareness, they are similar, but they're distinct. Concentration is the ability to keep the mind on a chosen object of meditation. It's the ability to stick to an object of meditation, to hold the mind to an object. So, for example, if we take the breath as an object, then the instruction that we are giving ourselves is that for the duration, the 5 to 10 minutes, that my goal is to observe the physical sensation of the air, generally the sensation that accompanies the in-breath and the out-breath in the space around the nostrils is the most common way of doing that. So for the purpose of that meditation, anything that arises in the mind that isn't the physical sensation that accompanies the in-breath and the out-breath in the space around the opening of the nostrils is a distraction. It's not the intended object of that meditation. And whenever there's a period of time when that intended object is what is arising in the mind, then we would say the mind is concentrated, the mind is focused on the object of meditation, because no distraction is arising in that period. Now for us, that period's quite short. That period's a few seconds, 30 seconds, maybe 45 seconds, and then something else, some other thought pops into our mind other than the intended object. So the mind has moved off of the intended object, and we would say we've lost our concentration. We're not concentrated on the object. So the ability to remain on the object is the skill of concentration. Then you have the skill of mindfulness or introspective awareness. And this skill is a skill in which we are able to notice that the mind has moved off of the intended object. This is being alert to the arising of distraction in the mind. And so these two skills, they work together. When we have good introspective awareness, then the periods of distraction are short because we've noticed, this was my intended object, and I'm alert, I'm aware that something else is happening in the mind. And when I become aware of that, I will pick my attention, my awareness up from the distraction, and I will place it back on the intended object. And then I will attempt to hold it there. I will attempt to keep it stuck to or absorbed into the intended object, um, up until the point where another distraction arises in the mind, and then we are now focused on something else. So this is also why I say, that meditation isn't daydreaming. Meditation isn't, um, just a relaxation. It isn't just like having time to relax, to kind of, because we have this intended object, and we need to give ourselves the instruction that my goal is to notice the arising of distraction, and my goal is to attempt to remain focused, attempt to remain concentrated on the intended object. Um, so, this is very different than anything else. Like, we might be reading a book, and when we're reading a book, we might be reminded, we're reading, and then we read something and it reminds us of something that someone said, or it reminds us of something we need to go do, and we might put the book down. We might, get up and call that person, or we might get up and write a note about something, or we might start journaling, or because we had this tangent, this other thought that arose, and we followed that, we energized that, we engaged in a new thing, we engaged in a new path of mental activity. And that's not what we want to do when we're meditating in the formal sense. We want to notice, we want to have an intended object, and then notice distraction and bring the mind back to the intended object. And so that's unique, right? That's different than anything else that we might do. We're intentionally not of course, distraction will arise, right? We're not saying that we're not going to have distraction, but we are giving ourselves the instruction that we're going to do our very best not to energize our distractions, not to intentionally. There's going to be, what am I having for lunch? Or there's going to be, I can't believe so and so said that, this morning. But then we have a choice about what happens right after that. We can either follow that thought and add an additional thought, okay, what am I going to have for lunch? Well, I had this yesterday. This is what I have in the fridge. This is kind of what I'm craving. And so, or this is the restaurant that, I wonder if they're open. When do they close? How long is it going to take me to get there? What do I need to do to make sure that I can find everything that I need to get there? These dominoes of additional thoughts, this train of thoughts. We can cut off that train of thought. We can redirect the mind instead of adding more and more and more thoughts that elaborate on the first one. We can catch that process, and we can just move the mind back to the intended object, and then attempt to keep it there, attempt to not allow it to get distracted. So we develop these two skills. We know that we need to be mindful of the arising of distraction, and we know that we need to attempt to have longer and longer periods of concentration, where the mind is absorbed into the intended object and not anything other than the intended object. And by following through on those intentions, over time, we get better at introspective awareness or mindfulness, and we get better at concentration, the skill of concentration, the skill of meditative, of introspective awareness. because one way of thinking about meditation as a skill is you could define it, um, putting aside the virtuous aspect of it, you could define it as the ability to concentrate the mind on a chosen object for as long as you might wish without the arising of distraction. Um, that's kind of, if we talk about the process of meditation, that's sort of the end goal of meditation as a skill, is to get to a point where we decide I'm going to engage in a session on compassion, or I'm going to engage in a session on patience. And that object is the only object that arises to the mind of that practitioner for as long as they're meditating, even if they meditate for days, even if they hours and hours and hours of meditation. Nothing other than the intended object arises in the mind of that practitioner. That's possible. And again, going along with what we said about things that don't exist in the Western psyche, is the fact that that is possible. And from the Buddhist perspective, that's so insignificant as compared to enlightenment, right? As compared to becoming a Buddha. But even just that, even the idea that even for 10 minutes, we could have no distraction arising in the mind, is a foreign concept to to Western knowledge, Western understanding of the nature of mind. But from the Buddhist perspective, absolutely possible to get to a point where hours and hours of meditation can go by with nothing other than the intended object being present in the mind, and there's no reduction in the vibrancy, the clarity of that object. The object is just as vibrant, just as immediate, just as clear from the first moment to 10 hours later in their session of meditation. That's it's called single point. It's called shamatha, shine, single pointed concentration. And it is as a in terms of meditation as a process, that's really the goal of Buddhist meditators, is to get to a point where that's possible, because that's so valuable. Being able to do that is so useful for the spiritual path. Because again, this is about familiarizing your mind with virtuous objects. So if you can get to that point, it's so incredibly, as compared to having a mind like ours, that where distractions constantly arising, and we're going here, to have that kind of still, quiet, calm, concentrated mind, in terms of the value of that for being able to become familiar with virtue, it's very powerful, very useful. And so it is a goal that Buddhist meditators will adopt, and really try to make progress on. Um, so definitely two very, very complementary skills that we develop when we engage in a practice. Any thoughts or questions? Yes, Sheila.
I'm full of curiosity. So I was recently meditating, and yes, doing what you were saying. And a thought came to me is like, does the mind not get upset that I keep bringing it back to my breath? Like, how I understand what you're saying, but how does the mind not get frustrated that I keep bringing it back, although it wants to go into daydream and it wants to like think about a whole bunch of things, but I keep bringing it back? Can you just speak to that a bit, please?
Oh, well, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, you could, I
Sorry, I
guess.
meant to say, sorry, I also want to add that my mind does not get upset like when I keep doing that. But so my curiosity is, why does it not get upset at me that I keep bringing it to the breath um every 10 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we all have experiences where we are just naturally really into, like, kind of what they might call the flow state, or even just like a really good movie that we're, and like, 2 hours went by and we were like, oh wow, I didn't get tired. I didn't, I was locked in, I was focused. And um so, but it is interesting that it does seem to be, the nature of the mind is to generate thought. I mean, that is just like they say, the function of our heart is to pump blood, the function of our lungs is to, circulate oxygen. um, the purpose, the function of our eyeballs is to generate visual form. The purpose of the mind, or the very function of the mind, is to generate thought. So the mind does need an object, it does need something to do. It isn't, the purpose of meditation isn't for the mind to do nothing, isn't for the mind to be inactive. That isn't possible. It isn't possible for the mind to be devoid of activity, of um, but we can give the mind just one thing to do, and to be like, this is what you're going to do. And so, but it certainly isn't our natural. Of course, we know that this idea of truly single pointed concentration does not come easily. That's, of course, absolutely true. All of the great meditators for the last 3,000 years will tell you that it requires a great deal of dedication, repetition, and so on, to train the mind, to cause the mind, not that it does seem to be the baseline state of an ordinary mind, that lots of different thoughts are what is happening, that we easily move from a feeling to a plan, planning for the future, to going back to a memory, to thinking about something happening in the body. Um, so disciplining the mind is something that does not seem to come naturally to the mind, because if it did, we wouldn't really need to do it. It would be, and you could imagine, like, a computer is different, right? Like, a computer is only going to do one thing. Like, you tell it to do one thing, it doesn't get distracted. It's not going to do something else. Um, it's only going to do what you told it to do. And our minds are not computers. Our minds are not like that. We seem to have something that is fundamentally different than that. But at the same time, why doesn't the mind? I mean, at the same time, the more successful we are, then I think it goes back to that distinction between coarse and subtle, right? The more active the mind is, the more objects, the more kind of busy the mind is, the more it's going outward, trying to contact different things, the coarser it is. And the more subdued, the more concentrated, the subtler it is. And the subtle mind gives rise to inner contentment, inner well-being, inner. So I think that's very supportive of moving the mind in the subtle direction. The fact that, I mean, I think almost everybody, I think, over time, when they begin to meditate, when it becomes more consistent, they notice, like, I didn't meditate today, and my mind is not, it's not as fun. My mind is kind of a mess as compared to when I do meditate, when I have more spaciousness, I have less reactivity. I so I do think that there's something like self perpetuating or self-supporting about training the mind to go. We're not training the mind to be busier. We're not training the mind to have more. We're training it to become subtler. And ultimately, when a person achieves fully qualified calm abiding, the ninth, what they call the ninth level, that comes along with what they call physical and mental bliss and pliancy, um, which is an indication that a quite subtle mind is just in the nature of physical and mental bliss and pliancy. So we're tapping, the more that we can move in that direction, we're getting closer and closer. We're tapping into that more and more. And we kind of want to, we're like, oh, this is great. Like, I want more and more of this. As long as, we're not super like obsessed or tight, and we're like, because if we develop good habits and we're not, um, we don't beat ourselves up about getting distracted, and because we can sort of, it can feel oppressive, it can feel defeatist, if we don't kind of do it in the best way from the beginning, or we don't really practice good habits. um but that's why I think, I mean, because it becomes more and more enjoyable, and I think that really helps us to want to move the mind in that subtler and subtler direction. um, but we could start there. I mean, we could be like a compute, like it is, I feel, and philosophically, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't know that Buddhism has an explanation for why it is. I mean, of course, we would have all just achieved enlightenment so long ago if that was really the nature of the mind. If the mind was like, well, just instantly you tell it to do one thing and it just can do that without any, like, that would be great. But so it is kind of a contradiction in a sense that you have to spend a lot of time and energy and effort, um, to get to this really blissful, light, pleasant, amazing place. But but you're not doing anything other than making your own mind more subtle. You're not, it's still your mind. That's still the nature of your mind. Um, it's just maybe that, in our environment, we've got so many things to look at and to taste and we have to kind of, for hundreds of thousands of years, we've had to sort of navigate that, right? In order to be alive, you have to find food, you've got to find water, you've got to navigate other people, and there's just so much in the environment, um, that it kind of supports that, that busyness of the mind. And if you're not also able to do that, you won't be successful in staying alive and fending off bears and, all that kind of stuff, being alert to danger. And, um, you know, so yeah, I mean, the people who weren't, probably the really chill, humans 10,000, 100,000 years ago, that weren't alert to, they didn't survive. They didn't. So selectively, maybe, we're just attuned, in a way that gives rise to distraction, because there's maybe an evolutionary advantage to that, perhaps.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah, so I mean, another thing that happens, with when we start to meditate, the ubiquitous experience is that people, will say, "Oh, I am terrible at this. I am the worst at this. No one has ever been," because we know going into it that we have this goal of concentrating the mind on a chosen object, and we know that, you know anything but the chosen object is what the mind is kind of going to so often in the 10 or 15 minutes. But really, the attitude that we really have to cultivate is when one that is the only process of making progress is the process of noticing the existence of distraction and then doing something about the existence of distraction, moving the mind back. Just like, so thinking about it in terms of like exercise, we know that if you want to physically develop the body, you go to the place where they have the heavy things and you pick the heavy things up and you put them back down, and you do that a lot, right? And that's how you get stronger. You just lift heavy things over and over again. You don't get mad when you show up to the gym and you're like, well, why are there the heavy things here that I'm picking up and putting down? You recognize, like, there is no mechanism other than that for my own physical strength, my own, that's how I do this. And necessarily there's an element of repetition. Necessarily you do it over and over and over for forever, right? And you don't, and also like you don't stop. Um, if you want to maintain the physical health of your body, you don't get to a point where it's like, okay, I don't have to exercise anymore. I don't have to be active. I mean, in whatever way, whether it's, dance or yoga or, hiking, but you never get to a point where you say, okay, I'm finished, being healthy. I'm finished moving my body. I'm finished. It's an everyday kind of a thing because you want to maintain the health of your body. Um, and so when we notice distraction and when we move the mind back, we are engaging in the only mechanism that brings about concentration. We are engaging in the only path that develops the mind where we can eventually get to being able to be single pointedly concentrated on the object. There is no magic. There is no esoteric kind of thing that someone's going to say, or they're going to give us this magic bullet that just now our mind is concentrated. The path of getting distracted, noticing distraction, and bringing the mind back to the object is how we make progress. So we should feel like it's amazing that I've noticed that I got distracted. We should feel joy that, because in a 10-minute session of meditation, there's going to be, 50, 75 distractions. And so if we only notice two of them, then that means we mostly weren't really paying attention. They just kind of went by. All of these distractions just kind of went by. But if we notice that 20 or 30 or 40 distractions arose, and that means that we're moving the mind right back to the intended object. We're moving the mind, we're not indulging in distraction. We're noticing so many of these individual small distractions and then moving the mind back and moving the mind back. So it feels, it starts to feel like we're getting worse. It starts to feel like I'm actually more distracted, but really the skill of mindfulness is just growing. The skill of these smaller and smaller periods of distraction are becoming more noticeable to the mind. And that's a sign of progress. That's a great sign. So we have to sort of cultivate this attitude of almost like playfulness, almost, of course, taking it seriously in the sense that, as I say, we go into it not thinking of it as daydreaming, not thinking of it as indulging in distraction, but with a mind of curiosity, a mind of, that wants to engage in the process, that does that, like, oh, I get to meditate today. I get to try to work on my mind. I get to do all of these things. Um, and not having this sort of heavy expectation of, oh, it should be like this, it needs to be like this, it shouldn't be like this. It's enough, it is sufficient to give yourself the instruction to notice the arising of distraction, and to do your best to notice the arising of distraction and to move the mind back to the object. And then to try to make progress in consistency, to try to, start out with once a week or twice a week, and then over the course of 6 months to try to get to a point where it's every single day. And then maybe over the next 6 months, get to a point where it's twice a day, every day. And then in a year, you've moved from like, I don't meditate to I meditate twice a day. And that's exceptional. Like, so being patient, having a plan, not beating yourself up, and not thinking that you're doing it wrong or that you're terrible at it, because you have the same mind that the Buddha had, that Shantideva and Lama Tsongkhapa and whatever, all of the great masters, their mind is the same as your mind. They've just had a longer period of developing their mind, of training their mind, of disciplining their mind. Okay, so we're done for today. Any final thoughts or questions?
Just a really quick question, Venerable Dunbar. Is there a specific time of the day that's better to meditate than others?
Well, in terms of the historical talk about the benefits of early morning meditation, if that is something that you really, really struggle with, and again, in the same way, we kind of have to be flexible. As soon as we wake up, though, the mind is kind of naturally a bit more subtle, because we were just, right, because this idea of subtle is withdrawn, and we were just asleep, which is really withdrawn, and we've just woken up. So the mind still has this sort of carryover of having been really withdrawn. Um, so they will talk about the benefits of early morning meditation, for that reason, because, and also, no one has annoyed us that day. We haven't had to deal with traffic. We haven't had to, there's our stress level maybe is a bit lower too in the early morning. So historically speaking, they will talk about the benefits of that. It's not going to work for everyone, though. Some people just really aren't morning people. And it might just be, but certainly, experiment with that and see. And we'll talk about some strategies for excitation and dullness when they might arise in meditation, and what to do, because we can't always, it's not always, if we want to engage in a session of meditation, we're going to be doing that on days and times that are not ideal. So there's going to be obstacles, and we'll talk about how to address those obstacles. But broadly speaking, that's what they would say, is early morning. All right. So today is Tuesday. We have a meditation retreat with Elaine this Saturday. It'll be on Zoom, if that's of interest. And I think Susan said that she might be local. And as I said, Elaine, it's a meditation retreat. So, I mean, there'll be some discussion, some exposition as well, but that is an opportunity as well. And Elaine is wonderful. She'll be here all month teaching on Sundays, and then this Saturday. Oh, yeah. So Susan, I don't know if midday works for you, but it's not typical. It's not a typical part of our schedule, at least not right now, but next month, and you all can look at the schedule for next month in February. Tariq Lama will be visiting us for the month of February. He's a young Lama. He's like 30 years old. He's part of the next generation of great masters. And so there's a 10-day, what we're calling meditation immersion program that he's going to be offering. It's at 12:15, so a little after noon, toward the end of the month for 10 days for 45 minutes. So I'll be giving a talk and then a meditation, and that will be at the center for 10 days. Again, only if midday kind of works for you, or if your lunchtime, if that is a possibility. And that'll be on Zoom. Everything will be on Zoom as well. And we're certainly looking into how to have more of a meditation, specifically meditation aspect, at the center, or at least on Zoom. It's hard to say because, again, we don't have a lot of teachers that are local. But yeah, Charglam is teaching 25 times next month, so it's pretty intense, and he's wonderful. All right, so yeah, I'll see everyone next week, I hope.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.